devs and goes nowhere. Okay. So let's talk about your Vigi game. So why don't we do this? Why don't you guys introduce yourselves first, and then we can get to the Q&A if that's cool. Whichever one of you wants to go first.
Gun, you're first.
Fuck.
Shirk, you're second.
I don't really know how to do this.
Well, just say your name and what you do for Dead Matter, unless they don't know.
I am Gunschlinger, and I'm from Germany, and I'm the AI programmer for Dead Matter.
Okay.
I'm Shirk. I'm from Canada, and I'm the lead artist. I focus on all the most of the environmental art, and all the world that you see in Dead Matter is taken care by me.
Okay. And you're the yellow guy, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yellow guy.
You're the yellow guy. All right. And then Johnny.
Hi, I'm Johnny. My real life name is actually Nick, and I'm the lead programmer. I'm the project founder, and I'm also the lead developer as well, coordinating everything and making the vlogs, and that covers pretty much most of what I do.
That's it, huh?
The man of many hats.
Yeah, that's quite a few hats.
I just didn't want to sound racist.
And this is why we're recording it for YouTube. Woo! Oh my lord! See, we'll just cut out all the racist stuff. It'll be totally fine. No problem. Wow, you should have heard the racist stuff Johnny said. All right. So
I'm not kidding. It was the Vietnamese food, man.
The Vietnamese food made you sick, huh?
I'm not kidding.
Damn.
I knew it was something food related.
How is that racist?
I mean, it's not. I just didn't want to say
Dude,
no. It's not the Chinese food. It's the
I get
Vietnamese
sick
food. That
from
just sounds
Monster
bad.
Energy drinks. It doesn't make it sound racist to Americans.
And then we got our host that's like, oh, or hey, are you the yellow guy? And then I'm just like, oh man, Shirk is also squinting in his photo, so that's just kind of a double whammy in itself.
My God. Oh man, none of this is PC at all. Yeah, this is how you get demonetized. I love it. All right.
You already are.
Okay.
All right,
so
we'll put on our good boy hats. Now.
no, I don't really care. If it got demonetized, I'm out the 17 cents or whatever that the ad revenue will make me. And cut.
That's not nice.
Well, that's okay. No one's gonna hear that part. It's totally fine. Okay. Question 1. Would you mind explaining to people who have never heard or seen anything of your game, what is Dead Matter?
I think this is something Johnny could answer.
Gunschlinger, why don't you take the floor for this one?
This is a hard question to answer.
It is.
It
It is. It's like that. It's like that elevator. Like, so what's your game about? And then you got to give the pitch.
Well, you don't want to.
And to pigeonhole it sucks. But it's always the question that people will ask you. So what's your game about?
So Dead Matter is a multiplayer zombie survival game with a focus on PvE combat, but you can also play PvP if you want.
So it's a focus on PvE.
Yes, but nothing is really stopping you from just killing everyone.
Okay.
It has a lot more depth than your traditional zombie survival game, where it's instead of just loot, shoot, maybe build a base, run around. You have a lot more depth. We have a quest or mission system, I guess. We have factions and AI that can kind of dole out different tasks for you. There's reputation with the AI. You can trade with them.
Interesting. So I would assume that you would have to build up reputation with these guys over time, right?
How we plan on implementing that at the moment is there's currently at the tail end of the vlog, there's a bit of footage where I'm showing off the metagame, and you can actually see that there's a bunch of different lots, and there's a trailer in every lot. So what you're going to actually have to do is you're going to have to claim multiple lots, secure the structure on each lot, and then you combine those and create a player settlement, and then a
Okay.
faction will send a liaison to your settlement at the start, and then essentially you do quests to tier your settlement up and get more supplies from that faction, and then the faction that you pick, you have to first meet them in game, or you have to go independent,
Okay.
which is another kind of strategy in itself. And then on top of performing tasks for the AI, you'll also be required to fend off kind of players, zombies, anyone that's trying to cause you any trouble. So that's kind of where a lot of the AI progression comes in. Just I wanted to step in
Okay.
and
So there,
yeah,
there are some like quest, quote unquote, driven mechanics to the game.
yes, yeah. There's going to be goals that you'll be given in the game by NPCs, and it's really important to us as well because we feel that with the way that some of the item economies work in these games, it's very easy for a player with literally 1 hour to walk to a very nice loot spawn, pick up the nicest gun in the game, pick up the nicest piece of armor in the
Yep.
game just by pure chance.
Yep.
And that can feel great, but it really kind of leads to this inconsistent gameplay where if someone does that on their first playthrough, they're going to expect to do it again, maybe, or it just kind of feels inconsistent. So
Yep.
with having a slightly more quest based system to kind of supplement the item spawn rates, it means that we can kind of put the weapons that are supposed to be rare. I mean, there's not that many VSSs in Canada. So it's
Yep.
meant to kind of place those weapons at the very top of the game and make those kind of what you actually have to tier your settlement up to actually access. And you have to play by the faction's rules as well. And every faction has their own set of rules.
Very cool. So will there be now, without giving too much away, because depending on what you guys want to divulge and what you don't want to do, I would assume that there's going to kind of be like these factions that are a bit more lawful or law abiding, and then there's going to be like things that are much more chaotic and bandit like, if you will, and maybe some things in between.
Should we pull up the faction sheet? I think we actually have I don't know. I think the vibe with this is kind of a bit more casual so far. So
Yeah.
kind of keeping with that, I think would work. But essentially, there's factions. I think Reggie has 5 that he's kind of done the story and kind of the karmic alignment charts. So
Okay.
there's essentially a faction that's kind of more oriented towards a bandit style gameplay. There's a faction that's dedicated to more of a lawful good sort of
Sure.
style of gameplay. So there's kind of meant to be a group for everyone to kind of fit into. And we also want to make sure that there is a bit of grayness to all of the different goals that the factions have in the world, and that there's overlap to create some interesting friction.
Nice.
Yeah, one of the big inspirations for like the whole faction system is a game called Stalker. It has
Sure.
like the later games in the series have faction relations, and they're all dynamic. They can change with reputation and stuff, and that's a big inspiration for how it works. And so, actually, Stalker in general is kind of like a big game that you can look to if you want to kind of get an idea how some things are kind of planned out, because Dead Matters, it's like a combination of a bunch of good ideas from different types of survival games. Like I was saying before, with like, it's not just loot and shoot. It's almost, we called it what, a rogue-lite.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's also it's almost like an RPG, but not an RPG. And like it is in the sense where it has like your missions and stuff like that, and progression, but not like a leveling up, like experience progression in a sense.
Sure.
And so it's hard to like compare Dead Matter to other games because it's kind of its own unique thing, while at the same time being a bunch of pieces of different games put together that we find would make like the ultimate survival game.
Yeah. So that was kind of like that kind of perfectly leads into my next question. So there are people obviously on the outside that don't have as much of an understanding about your game as you do, that will likely look at this and go, "Oh, it's another DayZ," right? Like I'm sure you've heard that a million times. So what do you think regarding the mechanics of your game, aside from the quest system that obviously we just talked about, which is huge? Because, to further your point, one of the things that players like myself notice is sometimes an abundance of freedom can be a bad thing, where, you just have too much choice or too many things that you could possibly go and do, and it's almost overwhelming to where you don't really know where you should go or what you should do or where it should start. And like early game Arc kind of has that problem where there's this overarching story for Arc that kind of got figured out much later in its development, even after it went live, and no one still really knew what was going on. It was like, tame dinosaurs, build a base.
Aliens.
Yeah, aliens, and all of a sudden the arcs were together and they're hovering over the earth and stuff, and like it was just like things evolve over time, sure. But in the case of your game, what do you think? Is there anything aside, I guess, from the questing system or this faction system that has these mission driven kind of mechanics that you think would set it apart from a game like a DayZ or an H1Z1 or a Conan Exiles or something like that?
If I can just say something quick about that choice thing you're talking about, it's actually, I think it's called, like, it has an actual name. It's like choice paralysis.
Yes.
Where it's people are overwhelmed with too much decision, and so the more choices you allow players to choose, the more difficult it becomes to choose one.
Yep.
And me and Johnny talked about it in the past, and like we kind of want to be able to push players in a certain like direction. We were talking
about letting players elect their own direction. It's about if a player wants to be someone that does a bunch of quests and likes having a quest system, kind of slowly introduce them to the game, there's an option for that sort of player. And I actually do prefer having some sort of objective. It makes the game a lot more fun for me because I feel like there's something I can play around.
Goal orientation.
Yeah,
exactly.
I love that. Yeah,
so different factions have the different play style. So it's like you might align to one, and that might give you enough of a like motivation or a goal to give you a certain play style that you can enjoy, and you don't have to suffer to make a choice of really what you want to do.
So do you think that there's anything aside from your mission system, for instance, like is there, or does there get to be a point where you've kind of like hit the end of that mission system, that faction generation, and now you're at the the quote unquote end game? Are there plans to keep players engaged from that point moving forward, or how do you envision the game kind of continuing beyond the mission driven progression based system that helps you grow?
Well, naturally, players, when they grow and expand their player settlements, they're obviously going to pick fights with each other, and that does play into a large part of what we're hoping would be a sustainable end game for at least, when we get to early access. So,
yeah, one of the things with DayZ and a lot of other zombie survival games, pretty much all of them, is the whole game is essentially static, and it's a very superficial game. It's literally, with the case of DayZ, it's run around, you loot, maybe you shoot some people, you gather gear, maybe you build a base, and that's it. And it's like rinse and repeat, and nothing else really changes in the world. But with Dead Matter, we have like an actual timeline of events that happen throughout the in-game year. So like the actual game progresses through time. So you have your different seasons, which drastically change your gameplay, and then throughout those seasons, you have different weather, which is like a kind of, it will change like a micro event. So maybe it's pouring out and you don't want to go outside because maybe you don't want to, maybe you just don't want to travel in the rain or something, or it's you want to go at night, but you have to decide, do I want to go when it's a full moon, so it's brighter outside, or do I want to go when it's no moon or an overcast, so it's completely black?
Right.
And we have a lot of dynamic events throughout the year that will kind of refresh things. It will introduce maybe new loot or new events in the world, maybe new quests, and just having that, like that actual timeline progression where the whole world isn't just static, I think is a very, very big part of what makes Dead Matter stick out from the rest of the survival games.
Yeah, I saw some of that in like your latest dev blog with how you were modifying like how the skybox works, and you know the dynamic changes in like the shadows and stuff as they get cast in the world, and how the sky like shifts between being like hazy and overcast and then cloudy, and kind of like back and forth, and then like the phases of the moon, which I thought was really cool. The one thing that I did notice that seemed like it was a little bit different was that you showed that the map will actually rotate through the 4 seasons. So,
Yeah.
you know, you have like kind of like this summer into fall into winter into spring into summer thing. And I actually did have a question about that regarding like the 4 seasons and how that changes like with the foliage and all. Will there be like dynamic temperature changes and that kind of stuff too that players will have to account for? And then by extension, are those seasons going to be like on like a calendar year cycle, or are they going to like kind of following like the calendar year as we see it here in the meat world, or is it going to be something that will be like truncated and can then be modified, maybe like private server-esque, or are there even going to be private servers? I guess there's another question that I guess I can ask.
Absolutely.
Okay. So absolutely private servers. Will you be able to modify the timelines?
The I don't know how like granular we're gonna get with like actual like timeline events. Right now, you can change like the day length, or it's a time multiplier, so you can make the day, the whole 24-hour cycle, as long or as short as you want, and then that affects the entire year. So if you have like a times 10,
so if the days
cycle,
move by faster, naturally the year goes by faster.
yeah, because it does actually follow like Johnny,
the sun and moon positions in the sky.
Johnny did some magic and got like the actual sun positioning throughout the year, so with the different equinoxes. And then
that's cool.
In like the winter days or shorter.
So in the vanilla sense, if I was to go play Dead Matter today, would it be then September 19th on like one of your quote unquote official servers, and then there'd kind of like be this slow progressive transition into winter, and it would follow like the normal calendar year? Or do you plan on having that be like a little bit faster, like a 12-week cycle instead of a 12-month cycle?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be faster.
Okay.
You wouldn't want to play a full year to have it in game. I think right now,
yeah, like every day is winter, no matter what you do. Yeah.
Actually, for a dedicated server, I thought about it. Most dedicated servers are going to stay up, and it would be roughly 3 months to a year if time was sped up 4 times, which for a persistent dedicated server, that actually kind of seems somewhat reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you can also tweak it too. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I'm sure there's gonna be maybe like admin tools and stuff that were like, would there be admin tools involved where like if you wanted to change it to winter, you could just change the season and it would happen?
You could just straight up just change the date, and then it would.
Oh, okay. Well, that works then.
Self-adjust for everything. Yeah.
So and then I guess that leads. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, but yeah, it does go through all the seasons, and with the seasons have different temperatures, and so there's a lot of gameplay implications.
And that would affect your character, I would assume.
Yeah, so if it's in the winter is going to be harsh. It's going to be
bundle
cold.
up.
So you have to prepare. Yeah, you want to kind of spend the year preparing for the winter.
So you'd have to actually like make some stores and preserve some food and like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you want to plan it out eventually, so you have warm gear and stuff for the winter, and that's part of the depth that we're talking about. That's quite
cool.
A bit different, and it's not just sporadic either. Like in Miscreated, for example, you'll have I don't know if it's winter or if it's like a rad storm or something, but it just kind of comes in the middle of summer and then leaves 30 minutes later. But in Dead Matter, it's like it's an actual season, like it's an actual cycle, and it's a long time. Like it could be 2 weeks of real life for an entire season, or it could be longer depending on what that time scale is.
Sure.
But it's something you actually have to plan for, and you know it's coming, and you know when it's coming.
Right. Yeah, that would. I mean, just from a server creation perspective, if you're modifying the seasons, which obviously modifies the environment that you're in and modifies like the planning time that you have, it would then kind of like cascade into modifying like how abundant are certain supplies going to be, and makes you have to think about how those things all play with each other. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's one of my like most anticipated features to get fleshed out is whole weather and seasons and how it affects gameplay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That seems like it would be
That's-
really cool.
that's a
Actually,
big one I want to
so there's a
work on
mechanic that no other
so
game
badly.
has. Not right
Yeah,
now. anyway.
well, I don't know if any other game has it, but it's definitely going to be new to the zombie survival genre.
Yeah, it was
and it's
zombie
definitely gonna be
survival. Yeah.
refreshing.
Yeah, that kind of makes things a little bit different for sure. So, that kind of
You
leads
can
me
also
to this.
think.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, I was going to add on to the event timeline thing. You can also think of the timeline of events with how it works in Dead Matter as essentially like, you've used it video editing, obviously.
Yes.
So when you've got all your clips loaded, those are kind of all of the different things that happen at the point in time. It's almost like you've dragged the cursor over,
Right.
if that makes sense.
So
because
it
all of
actually like
those-
moves things
yeah,
forward or backward in time, like linearly. You mean?
Just scrubs through. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would essentially be scrubbing through a timeline of events that get triggered as the meta game ticks forward.
Cool. That's pretty cool. So so the game obviously is set in Alberta, right? So why Canada and not anywhere else? You know, maybe it's just because Johnny, you're from there, correct?
Why not Germany?
Well,
this is definitely a Johnny answer.
Well, like for instance, like Fallout 76 was in West Virginia, just cause, you know. So I didn't know if it was just like well, that's where I'm here, you know, and you know that's why we're doing it, or if you just picked that spot cause that's where the dart hit.
No, I'm from Calgary, and I was a little bit biased to this place, but originally, and even in Dead Matter mod, it was supposed to be an island off of the coast of British Columbia. And funnily enough, Dusty, who's a former developer on the project, he traveled through Calgary through the mountains and said, man, I've lived on a crappy island my whole life. I really want a game that just takes place in these mountains. And that's kind of why our first kind of area that we've been focusing on is right that just gorgeous mountain area. And a lot of
That's
the
cool.
work Shirk has done, such as his cabins and stuff, really seem to just bring that whole area to life. And yeah. So
Now,
I
how
kind
big?
of wanted
How
to
big
do
is
where
the
he
map?
lived.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. You just wanted to be where the mountains were was kind of the idea.
Well, it was just weird because like I kind of wanted to do the island, and then he wanted to do Alberta, even though we came from each other's places. So
Sure.
and then we ultimately decided on here. So
Yeah, and obviously because you're in, you know, the Rocky Mountain region of Canada, you have like those much more extreme like winter conditions potentially and that kind of stuff. So it could make for a much more harsh, I guess, survival experience, which would be
It
kind of
definitely
cool.
has like
It's not like you're living in
diverse-
like the middle of Florida and you never really have to worry about getting cold, you know.
yeah, it has all the things that actually like it's a very good area. The only complaint I have with the area itself is, well, aside from like Alberta and Calgary having like really weird houses and stuff where it makes it very difficult to like capture the essence of some places. But what makes it difficult is because it's completely landlocked. And
Yeah.
really when it comes to gameplay and making up borders and stuff, that's my only complaint about it. Everything else is fantastic because you have the mountains and you have the prairies and you have the four seasons. And so you have a lot of different like biomes essentially in this one area. And so
Sure.
it makes it for a very interesting and diverse map to travel across. It's not just like a flat plain. It's not just mountains. You have kind of a balance of both. So you can, you know, if you get fatigued from one kind of style, maybe you can go somewhere else.
Sure.
And it gives us a lot of gameplay opportunities as well.
And how big is the map now? Because I know that there was kind of like this stretch goal that allowed, or the plan was to expand upon like the original map. So how large are we talking in terms of like, you know, square kilometers or however it is that you would measure it?
It's
I think
well,
the goal
right now,
for the closed alpha right now is around 5K by 5K, but I
Yeah.
mean,
it's kind of malleable with the size of everything. It's more or less like what's a good area for the game to take place in. When we started out, the whole map, the whole playable area at the end game kind of thing is planned to be around 20 kilometers by 20 kilometers, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to fill all of that. We're going to do what's best for gameplay. Like, we don't want to have stretches of nothingness just because we want to have a lot of space.
Just because you want room. Right.
Yeah, we want to utilize the space well, right? I think more people would want like a condensed map that has more interesting like points of interest and like locations that aren't disgustingly far away than having a very barren map and just a large map. They rather just have something more interesting. So it's
right.
In the end, it's supposed to be around 20 by 20, so 400 square kilometers, but it'll, chances are it might be smaller. Just depends on if we can fill that area.
Yeah, that does tend to be an issue with the survival genre in general. Is on these very, very large survival based maps, there's a lot of expanse of nothing, just like how you put it. Yeah, walking simulator. You nailed it.
Yeah.
If a survival game, that has good gun mechanics or whatever, actually allows you to put in a hotkey for auto run, you have a problem. Right?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of with you in that like vein of thinking where you don't want, like, obviously travel is something that people want to be able to do. Like, you don't want people like just like ramming into each other.
Yeah.
At all points in time.
The Calgary area, it's like not everything's close. So if we want to be accurate to the actual geographical area, it's like not everything can be walking distance, right? It's like we want to have vehicles that have an importance, but we also want to have a lot of places where it's like it's an interesting location and you can move by foot to another spot, maybe within like a smaller area of the map, and still not have to walk an hour to get somewhere else. So it's like we still have to kind of keep that distances between things, but we also still want to keep it interesting. So it's we'll take a lot of creative liberties with it.
So regarding the history of the game, so it was originally a mod for Crysis back in 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. And then that led to the decision ultimately to create like this standalone version. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then you guys worked through like a Kickstarter campaign, correct? And had kind of planned this slated release of the game in 2017. And then I guess ultimately made the decision to bring things kind of back in-house, go back to the drawing board, and then set a much later date to I don't know, I don't want to say get it right because that seems a little bit, too pushy. But to make the game the way that you had really envisioned making it, I guess is a better way of putting it. So what, if you wouldn't mind, could you kind of lead me through that process and how you ultimately decided the right idea was to just say, okay, well, we really need to kind of like refocus on what we're doing here?
Ultimately, the decision came from a lot of the dialogue that we had with our backers. Really, we talked to a lot of our backers on Discord. Primarily was our biggest platform.
Sure.
I'm trying to expand out a bit more to Reddit and Twitter now, but regardless, we try to keep in touch with our backers. We try and, understand how they feel about things. And, we want to make sure that people know that we're working on the game, we're working on bringing it forward, but to go from essentially a prototype, a functional tech demo, and taking that and turning it into an alpha build of a game, that's quite a bit of a leap. And I don't think people realize, like, as soon as you download Unreal Engine and throw in some first-person animations, and I think especially when you're working with someone else's engine, there's a bar that you have to hit in order for the game to feel responsive, to feel immersive. And when it comes to a survival game, a lot of the horror elements come from that immersion. It comes from you feeling like a character in this world, and that's incredibly important to us. And that's what we want to nail for the closed alpha. We also wanted to make sure that our primary gameplay loops were developed for the closed alpha so that we could get meaningful feedback on it as we push the game towards early access. initially our closed alpha period was actually only going to be a month. We're expanding it as long as we think that it needs to stay into a closed alpha, and we want to work with our backers and work directly on feedback with them. So
Okay. So the idea to I guess extend the timeline was really just based on, I guess, the daunting task of needing to migrate this from a tech demo to something that like anyone could play is kind of the idea.
yeah, we felt that with the money that we had raised and the fact that the fact that we had brought in a lot more money, we didn't want to essentially put what was essentially a prototype that we wanted to build up on early access straight on out there yet. We wanted to kind of actually make it our own project, have our own foliage, have our own everything. And
so you modeled this game from the floor up.
Yeah. Everything, every piece of code in the game, outside of a few third-party plugins, it's all created in-house. Tons of the art is created in-house, and there was pretty much 3 people on the core team up until the 5th month of this year, so around May or April. So that also kind of sucks because we've also been hiring more people, but that takes time, and it also we have to find the people to begin with as well.
Sure. Sure.
And it sucks because
do you find that to be difficult?
It definitely weighs down the pipeline, and there's a reason I brought on additional programmers, because I ended up having to be taken out of being able to work directly on the project so often. Sure. That's why we ramped up, because I want to make sure that if I have to step out, at least someone else is there making progress, and that's also why there's 2 of them. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, and you want to try and stick to the timeline that you have set for yourselves as best as possible, right?
We want to be prepared as well for closed alpha.
Yeah, of course, because that's going to be a stressful time, right?
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say there's going from like the Kickstarter, like the success the Kickstarter had was like I joined basically in the Kickstarter period, and the success it had was so much more. It was almost overwhelming in a sense. Like it was so much more than what was assumed was going to happen. Like I think the original plan was kind of because the original release date was slated for like February 2018, and I think the goal of that was basically get Dead Matter to a point where people could play it, and then put on early access, and early access would then fund further development. But because we got so much money from Kickstarter and now Indiegogo and stuff, it's like that's not the smartest decision.
Well, and especially when it comes to survival-based games, we have all seen the sour taste it will put in players' mouths when it comes to the quote-unquote early access idea, even in Steam, especially in Steam, for some games that never, ever get past or ever seemingly will ever get past early release, or you do kind of like, not to like nail Ark to the wall, but you do kind of like what Ark did, where the game was $20 or $30, and then one day you woke up and it was $60 and they hadn't really changed anything. So
yeah, we have to kind of have like an unconventional approach to how we go into early access because of the games that followed before us, or they were released and they kind of soured how early access functions. Early access is kind of meant to be like it could be an alpha beta period, but there's a lot of games that just went out in not a good state. So now we don't want to follow the trend of a zombie survival game that goes into early access and it's not great, and then it fades into obscurity because it's not where people thought it was going to be. So we have the one shot of when we go into early access, and we need that to be captivating and like actually capture people's attention, where they're drawn to come back and they're interested in the game and they're like, this has potential. But if we go too early, people might not see the potential the game has and they might just write it off. So we have to kind of go in with this unconventional approach of how we're going to go into early access. And because of that, we have these delays, which are unfortunate, but they're also required because we just can't put out the game if it's not in the state that we want it to be because we know people aren't going to enjoy it.
I'm kind of chuckling to myself over here because you referred to as entering early access as an unconventional approach, like at the point in time that you actually go into early access being unconventional, and it's actually a really sad state to think that waiting for a game to be more stable and have more content than its predecessors at the point in time that you say we're ready for early access now is unconventional. Oh, you're killing it. Oh,
I
such a
genuinely
testament
think
to the times we live in, man.
I think a lot of people are willing to judge a game on the content that it puts out onto early access. And
yes, they are.
And if you do not prove to these people that your product is good, they're not going to continue buying your game. They're not going to continue funding you. All of your hype has died because people think you're an incompetent developer. But reality is, Dead Matter looked something like Survive the Nights internally at one point, and that's just the reality of game development. We just decided to not ship it.
Well, that's good, because then people would have accused you of being a clone. You know what I mean? So
yeah, like we got to get to the point where we can differentiate ourselves from other survival games.
Absolutely,
and we want that point to be the first point of contact with people. So
you need those bullet points that refer to the marketability of what it is that you're marketing to actually be functional. So that way you can say, look at the cool stuff that you can do. You know what I mean? And I completely agree with that. So regarding the game and playing the game and you know, people interacting in the game, in terms of like a dedicated server for this game, what do you view as being your like quote unquote ideal like server capacity? Tough question, right? Tough question, right?
Well, right now the player limit is like 36.
36. Well, yeah, but again, early release, you know, or early development stages and that kind of stuff. Obviously, there's some optimizing that comes into that later on. But you know, for instance, you can find Rust servers that have, you know, 100 player limits or 200 player limits. Not that's something
but that's because like Rust is really PvP focused.
Yes, and it doesn't necessarily have as nearly as much content as what you guys are trying to pack into what you're doing. I think Unreal nails it. I really love the Unreal Engine and what you can do with it. And I like how it works for what it is that you're trying to accomplish. It seems like it plays very, very well in the environment today. But
yeah,
you know,
there's actually some concerns people have with sorry to interrupt, with
That's
Unreal, with like player capacity with some games. But a lot of the time, the issues that arise with the games that have a lot of players is not the engine itself. It's just how the developers have decided to do things.
Sure.
Like the engines themselves, the engine is just a tool. A lot of the time there's, you know, it's just the implementation of some kind of system that is terrible.
Yeah.
Like if you look at
you're kind of nailing it there too, because like if you have a game that was developed in Unity, people will be like, well, why didn't you just use your Unreal Engine? And then if you have an Unreal Engine game, people, why don't you just develop it in Unity? Like, you know, like nobody wins, you know? It's,
but if you look at games like Fortnite,
right? So wait, because you're doing this in Unreal, this is going to be Epic Store exclusive, right?
Yeah, of
I'm not
course.
supposed to mention that.
Cut.
Cut.
But yeah, if you look at games like Fortnite or PUBG, they have large player counts, and I haven't played PUBG in a while, so I don't really actually know how well it's handled now. But there's a lot of players in those games, and the games handle them well. And it's just
Fortnite is fantastic. It just wasn't always, you know.
Yeah, so it just goes to show that the engine's capable. It just depends on how stuff's implemented.
Correct.
There's other Unreal games that maybe early access or other indie games that don't utilize everything correctly or to its potential, and so you might get lag with 36 players in a different game, but that's just because that's the way they've implemented everything, and it's not a good metric to judge the whole. So is
there a roundabout number that you think that you would like to see in terms of like, you know, your max server capacity that you'd like to try and target, or, you know, some kind of upper limit to what you think it's capable of doing?
I think it was around 80, but it's really going to depend on like a bunch of different things, right?
Sure.
Like there's a whole, like the player density on the map. As the map expands, like the physical size, we can introduce more players because we want to keep like a specific density of players,
Sure.
so it's not everybody running around the coast of a level getting killed right away. Like you want to kind of space everything out.
Right.
But then there's also all the networking stuff that Johnny and Gunn could kind of elaborate on, for the cost of having more players in, I guess a persistent world. That it's just, there's a lot of stuff that you have your ideals, but then you have to test and you have to make sure stuff works. And so I think the goal was
the movement component, actually.
So the major the goal would be to try and hit like 80 as a server capacity limit, but it could be less, right?
It could be less,
60
could be
to
more.
80.
Could be more, sure.
It just depends on, like Johnny was saying, the movement component. Like if it can get optimized on the engine side in the future, then that could reduce, the overhead of that. It could become cheaper to have more players.
Well, plus, like, also mechanically speaking, you're saying that this is primarily a PvE experience. So then, in addition to all of the players, you're talking about like these massive hordes of zombies. Kind of like, and I don't know if it's going to get to like the herd level, like you would see in, The Walking Dead or something like that, where you have like just
We
hundreds.
have a lot.
Yeah. So if you're talking about like that many, animated individual objects moving through, a space and time on a server like this, obviously like that would need some optimizing in and of itself, just to be playable.
Yeah, like everything
the zombies are aggressively optimized.
Yeah. Well, I've seen some things from what you guys have shown, which looks amazing. So
yeah.
That kind of stuff is like, that's the kind of stuff that I see and I'm like, oh man, if I'm that guy, like like that would be like such like the adrenaline moments that you like want to have,
Oh,
Yeah.
you saw my Twitter.
What's that?
You saw my Twitter post.
Yeah. You're like, I don't know how I got here.
I was actually shocked how many zombies we can have. Like that was way above my limit. I kept telling people like, yeah,
I did the math on it, boy.
you can
I
have
told you it would be that
100.
many.
You can have like 100 on screen at once, and after that, your frame rate is gonna die. And then our third coder, Epix, just spammed the spawn zombie button on the server, and it just went over the limit.
Just
and
kept going?
Ran smoothly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's a testament to your work, man.
That was
You're
terrifying.
doing stuff. Doing stuff. See? Gunschlinger knows what he's doing.
And then Johnny shot us all.
Yeah.
Um,
But everything has an impact, like when it comes to multiplayer. So I don't even know how many, like if we could theoretically say we could have 200 players, no problem in the full map. I don't know if we'd want to have that many, because the more players you have, the more
what gets condensed. And then you would have settlements butting up against each other and stuff, right? So
Yeah,
it's
it's
just
just 80
gameplay.
players on a 400 kilometer square map. Like people are actually supposed to spread out quite a bit in Dead Matter. You are supposed to get a vehicle at one point, and there's meant to be swaths of land in the game that are just boring ass country farmhouses one after the other,
right,
and
with nothing in them. You find a
Yeah,
bandage and you're like, oh good, another strip of cloth. Yay.
We want people to have like that real we want there to be variety in the map, and we also want to make sure that there's a lot of kind of isolated structures for people to barricade in as well.
Yeah, you don't want to have like every building you go to, it's like, how many neighbors do I have? Like you want to be able to go to like find a house somewhere, and maybe there's a house down the road, and like you're like, there's probably nobody in this because of how spread out, we're not spread out everything is, but how large the whole world is with the amount of people in it. You don't want to have to like go into a subdivision and assume that there's going to be like 30 other people living in here, and your constant anxiety and fear that someone's going to come and break in your house and steal everything. So
yeah,
having the ability to kind of not have so much worry when like living in a house, I guess, is kind of nice.
Well, and the thing that I actually like very, very much about what you guys have done in your marketing is you've marketed toward the soloist. Because one of the things that I like to do when I play survival games is I'm a solo player, predominantly, especially, because of streaming and all that stuff. It's a lot easier to interact with an audience when you're playing alone. So because you guys have built the game with that in mind, to where like it's fun if you're in a team, but it's also super fun if you're like playing by yourself, which is something you can't do in a game like Atlas, for instance. You have to have a crew of people in order to man a ship, unless it's a raft with a tablecloth sail. And And in this game, you're basically saying like if you want to play as a solo player, you can, and it's totally fine. Which in a game like Ark was awesome because you could make like these little cheeky hidden bases all over maps that no one ever found, and stage like these very, very disruptive things to large groups of players, just because you could go like hardcore Rambo guerrilla mode and really mess with people. So those are the kinds of things that I absolutely love about survival games that allow for those types of mechanics. And because you guys have marketed it that way, that's like a really cool thing. And is there anything regarding like solo play that you think would be like more advantageous for a game like yours versus playing in teams, or do you feel like there's kind of like advantages and disadvantages to like to both things the way that you're designing it?
I mean, like there might be, like right now there isn't anything kind of
Well, with
fixed
the
contract for
former
that, but
with the
you gonna say,
former
John?
occupation system, there are certain former occupations that are more oriented towards solo play, and then there are others that are more oriented towards group play.
When you say former occupation, you mean like what their job was prior to
Yeah,
coming
yeah.
in? Like you
So
could say
when
I'm
you
a
join a
carpenter, I was a
server-
police officer, or something like that.
So
Yeah.
here's the current. So we had a character creator system in the past.
Mhm.
We want to redo it, and essentially the pipeline for joining a server is you join the server. You then have a menu that shows up, kind of like in Scum, and then you get to
Okay.
create a character. So you can have multiple characters on the same server, and if a server owner wants, they can limit it to one or none, or they could also add it so they get permanently killed on death. So it's not a ban, but
Interesting.
you lose the character. So
So it's kind of like
some
this
of the-
true survival, like in its purest form, is like it's intended to be a little bit more hardcore, where like if there's permadeath involved, you're dead and gone. You got to make a new guy and kind of start over.
Yeah, there's an
That's a
option.
server choice, though, right?
Yeah.
Oh, so like if you die on a server, you could actually like you're dead, like you can't come back. If that's
No,
what the
it's-
server opts for.
No,
No,
that
deletes
char-
your character.
it
Oh,
deletes
would delete your character.
and
That's
make a
what.
new
Yeah.
one.
So
Yeah, you
the
won't get
character is
back.
no longer. You have to start over with a fresh character.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you can still play on that server. It's just like that character's storyline is gone now.
God, could you
Yeah,
imagine
so-
if you got banned? Like, you're like, nope, you can't come back. Bye, you're dead. Like,
Minecraft actually does that with
That-
their hardcore mode. They just ban you.
that's
on the
kind of
server.
crazy. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Can't even spectate.
Very cool. That's hardcore, man.
There are certain items you cannot lose on like a normal character, which
Mm-hmm.
is like our progression system. Like you can't lose your money. There's
Okay.
like a journal and like a wallet and shit like that.
So there are certain things that persist through death.
yes,
Yes.
you will
Hardcore, I
keep them.
believe. Hardcore is where you would lose that stuff, right? On the tool belt?
Yeah, because you lose the character, which
Yeah.
you lose the tool belt with as
Okay.
well.
Yeah. But
And
like
then
on
other
normal,
people
if
will be
someone
able to
kills
loot it.
you, you can
And I'm
take it
is
from
there
them.
is there intended to be kind of like a soft skill or like educating kind of system where, you know, if you've cultivated carrots 17 times, you know, or 17 seasons in a row, you just become better at it. So then if you die, you don't have like you're not as skillful at farming, for instance, and you kind of have to like start over as somebody that fumbles through it again.
I don't know if we've thought about any sort of abilities that you kind of learn just in a single life, just more or less because people are going to die a lot,
Perfect.
especially in the modes that value life a little bit less. So
There are the things like if you choose your past occupation as like a doctor or a mechanic, you do get like a bonus I guess proficiency with whatever that entails. So like if you're a doctor, you might be able to heal people with more efficiency than say like a normal person. If you're a
Sure.
mechanic, you'll be able to repair vehicles with maybe less requirements, like less
Like you
pieces
do it
and stuff like that.
less resources and maybe a little faster.
Yeah,
or
less
something like that.
resources. So there's that. I don't know if we're going to go into the realm of allowing players to kind of cross over and learn new things. I mean, that's something down the line we could maybe
Sure.
think about, but I don't think there's any plan for that.
there
Right now.
was definitely going to be kind of skill magazines or ways to learn new ways of building things.
Oh, I get what you're
did
saying.
want
Like you could read
Yeah,
up on
like-
how to be a doctor. I read this book and now I'm a doctor. Woo!
Yeah.
It
But
makes
I mean,
sense to have,
that's
like,
what
some
makes
things
video
like
games
that.
great, right? I mean, like you could just it's got that skill point. Let's do this, you know?
But we do
Well,
want to
they
have,
don't
like, the
necessarily have
past.
to be permanent too.
Yeah, we do want to have the past occupations make sense. So, like, in a team play,
Sure.
or if you want to play solo, it's like you pick something that's more well-rounded, but that will stick with that character. If somebody else could just spawn as, like, unemployed homeless student or something like that, but then they could work their way up to being like a doctor with a, advanced degree in
Well,
engineering or something.
it's like when you roll a character with certain stat points on any role playing game, right? Like Dark Souls, right? Like you could roll somebody that already had like kind of this preset gear loadout. You could modify them over time however you saw fit, but they would start off with, a certain gear set, or in the case of the ultra hardcore person, you could start out with like the equivalent of a board with a nail in it and somebody wearing a diaper and nothing else. And they don't have any they don't have hardly any stat points, but that's like, true fashion character, like the way that you want to make it. They have nothing. So I always like kind of like that idea where you could kind of like make your character whatever you wanted it to be eventually. But obviously,
Yeah.
those systems take time to construct and
I
balance.
like the idea of being able to do that as well, but to an extent. Like, we're talking about, if you're a doctor, like you can't read a book and become a doctor, but
Right,
it would
yeah.
make sense where you could maybe read like a first aid guide or something that maybe improves
Yes.
your efficiency, but not to the extent of a doctor.
Well, I was just thinking from like the survival standpoint, if you've, bound some wounds with, some bandages, 100 times, obviously you're going to get to be a little bit more proficient at that kind of stuff. The first time you suture a wound, it's not going to look so great, but, after the 50th time, maybe you start getting it down. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
stuff like that makes sense. But I personally, I think like it should never surpass what like that actual professions.
yeah, no, I mean, somebody went to
baseline.
college to become a doctor. Like you're not going to get there with a first aid kit and a TV guide, so.
No matter how many times you like stitch up somebody, yeah, you're not going to become a doctor.
Right.
So just having those like segments of skills, I like that idea.
Yeah, I mean, just like the quote unquote soft skill progression, because then obviously like it adds that extra element of like, oh, I need to survive, otherwise I'm gonna forget all this stuff I learned. When you start a new character, it's just one more thing that you lose. I don't know. Anyway, okay, let's see. So I saw on the Indiegogo page some of the developmental and stretch goals were things like agriculture, radio stations was cool, and air vehicles like helicopters and planes, right? Do you have any insights on how these systems will work? Can you like build your own radio tower? Will you have to like piece together a helicopter or like repair the engine or find broken parts to like put back into it so it'll fly? And will those things kind of like be available when you quote unquote launch the game?
By launch, do you mean like early access or
Well,
like
I would assume that
final
wouldn't be
release?
like an early access thing because you're looking more at functionality. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah. I mean, I guess at some point that stuff would be included, right?
Yeah.
So do you have any idea on how like those like things like a radio tower or like the helicopter or planes or something, like how that would work like from a survival standpoint?
So, the thing with the radio towers is that when you climb up them, and we're planning on adding a system that will require you to look through binoculars for this. But basically, when you go up onto a tall object, and specifically the radio towers and the firewatch towers will both have this. If you look around, and there'll be kind of markers that point to the local landmarks and the nearest tower that'll kind of show up on your player's HUD. And that's to kind of guide the players around the world more naturally. And then for players that kind of prefer the more hardcore experience, there wouldn't be kind of anything present there, but we would still
be able to
definitely
like look
tailor
around at your surroundings at least.
Yeah, we would tailor the art to kind of be more of that UI element. Like it wouldn't necessarily be like it would be kind of like a pseudo like kind of a scope glint from Battlefield. You know what I mean? Like something to just catch the player's eye,
Yes.
but
Yeah,
not
you'd have
do it
kind
in
of
a
like
way
a
that
mirror
shatters their
flash
immersion.
or something
Yeah.
like that. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of it's not meant to be, gimmicky Far Cry or whatever, where there's
Yeah, you
it's
got
kinda
you
meant
just got
to-
all these points on your map. Yeah.
It's got to blend in.
Okay, that makes sense. So
And
will
then,
the will the
then,
radios like will there be like radio stations? Will there be like function for something like that?
Yeah, we've got a voice actor. He was briefly in the trailer for the May 2019 trailer. He
If
can do a perfect Alex Jones.
I heard a rumor that my good friend 41 was voice acting in your game.
We did an audition for like bandit voices because like the bandit AI needs a lot of shout outs. For,
Oh, like a
small
lot of
things.
yelling. Gotcha.
we have
Yeah,
zombies and
a
stuff
lot
as
of
well.
insults.
Gotcha.
And he was one of them
Nice.
who like got the job basically because he's so good.
Yeah, he's awesome. That's like Ben stuff I've always wanted to get into doing and just never had the balls. So
Well,
I'm
you're
happy
too
for him.
late.
What's that?
You're too late.
Yeah, no, it's fine. You're too late, he says. So there's going to be radio stations then, and then could any player then like potentially be able to broadcast? Would they be able to like make their own radio station if they wanted to?
You'll be able to broadcast through text and voice. So, because you can talk as your character through typing, right? Like, so you can yell, whisper.
Oh yeah, sure, of course.
Just by yeah. So, you can also use the radio, and it's just so players that are constrained to like not being able to use like their headset or whatever, they can still just type /R. And so, there's personal radios that players will be able to use to communicate with each other.
Okay.
And then they're also going to be able to, if there's an abandoned broadcasting station, provided they power it up, they can then broadcast on a given frequency that other players can tune into.
That's cool. That'll be cool. And then regarding like the flying vehicles, how do you envision those working?
That's more of a question for Abix, actually, just because he's the one that kind of handles all of that. So,
and just for the people that are like viewing / listening, who is Abix?
He's the third programmer on the team.
Okay.
So he's been helping us a lot with our vehicles.
He's the Australian.
The air vehicles though, they'll be able to fly up and down probably. Left.
They'll
right,
be able to
forward,
fly.
back.
All right, cool. Air vehicles that can fly. Nailed it.
Yeah, the actual like details of that. Abix is kind of the one who's dealing with like the actual functionality of the vehicles.
Like how they would be enabled or turned on.
Like how they get handled if they're gonna maybe follow the flight pattern, I guess, of other games, of like maybe how their controls work and stuff like that.
Sure.
So he's not going to work on those for a while because he has other stuff, and those are kind of later down the line. But, I don't know how rare air vehicles will be. Probably pretty rare, and like I think the fuel for them will probably be a little bit more difficult to get like hang of. I don't think it's just gasoline in these planes, right?
No, they don't typically.
Yeah, so it's.
I think you'd have a problem.
They'll probably be more of like not an end game, but a much later on type of vehicle. Like you won't see people just spawning, running for a helicopter and flying the helicopter most likely.
Okay. Yeah, because that was kind of the question is like, are they going to be functional? Like if you find a helicopter, you can just hop in as long as you have fuel and like fire it up, or will you have to, find things to fix it and then, you could as like a, maybe like a longer duration kind of thing. It takes you some time to get it to work.
From what I remember, Abix said in another interview that he wanted the parts for the air vehicles to actually be a bit harder to find, to kind of give players that feeling that they had back in the DayZ days when they found their first helicopter and kind of had to go and grab everything to put it together and get it off the ground. So,
yeah.
Grab this huge helicopter rotor with your fucking backpack.
Sling it over your shoulder, just walk it off. Yeah.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah.
Yes, they're probably going to be difficult things to get a hold of, manage, maintain. just because they are not necessarily overpowered, but they're a very easy way to get around and away from people. Like, you don't have to worry about zombies essentially with air vehicles until you land, and it depends on where you land and stuff. So they
Right.
are definitely like a higher level vehicle.
Not if they jump.
You won't just find them in the middle of like a field.
Superhero landing.
Okay, hear me out. Zombie jets. Okay.
Zombie jetpacks.
This
No,
isn't
just
Wolfenstein,
jets.
dude.
Why not? We're going to
This is Canada.
Zombies
Not
on
Germany.
rocket roller skates. Make it happen.
This game is boring.
Okay, so this one kind of goes back to like netcode, if you will. So with survival games that allow for things like base building, there's an overarching issue with the number of bases that get built, ultimately taxing servers to like a critical level, causing a lot of lag and desync problems when dynamically loading so many things and loading, unloading, depending on who's in proximity, that kind of thing. We see this especially in large map games, large scale games like Ark, Conan Exiles, which have very, very large problems with this, and even Rust can experience this to an extent. How do you view this problem for yourselves, or do you think it will be a problem at all based on how you're constructing your game?
Okay, I'm not the one to answer this, but one of the big things with Dead Matter is you don't build your own base out of like scrap metal. So
Right.
you claim an existing building, and an existing building is the cost of the building is very minimal on the server, aside from maybe like all the information in it for like doors and windows. But when you go to barricade a house or fortify it, it's just the windows, it's the doors, and then you have a lot that you claim with the building. So then if you want to say build walls around that for defense, like those are the only costs that are associated with like the building essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not going to have these mega structures that are comprised of like 1,000 individual pieces. So
Right.
it's a lot more performant just because you need a lot less resources to actually construct and fortify. So
Also, we batch those objects.
yeah, there's
Which
engines.
means like they get rendered in one draw call, which is like a draw call is like if your graphics card wants to render something on your screen.
Yeah,
Then it's
draw
called a
calls.
draw call, and we can just render like all of the wooden planks that you placed in one draw call. Which
Yeah,
is
draw
really
calls.
performant.
They're basically one of the big expenses in video games. The less amount of draw calls you have, the better hopefully your game will perform.
Right.
And with a lot of these games, and this isn't an engine thing as well. Like it depends on
It's a
what kind of engine
balance too, because there's also like you have to like there's the triangle balance as well. So when you issue a draw call, if you have like 15 million triangles in that one draw call that your GPU still has to draw individually, well,
Yeah.
honestly, with a modern GPU, probably something like 150 million polygon or triangles.
Yeah, but we talk about a plank, so
yeah. So
that shouldn't
the
be too
reason.
hard.
So if you have a lot of draw calls, the problem is the CPU has to go back and forth between the GPU a lot. And so you know how your graphics card is literally like underneath your CPU, right?
Yep.
So having to actually go send a call from the CPU onto the bus on your hardware into the graphics card, and then it sends its return data to the CPU. That all takes a little bit of time.
Mm-hmm.
And we're counting like fractions of milliseconds here. So I'm talking like tenths of a of like of a millisecond, and there's 1,000 milliseconds in a second.
Right.
So
not long.
Yeah, but if you have 2,000 of those, when in
Right.
reality it could be 50, the call back and forth does add quite a bit of weight. So you want to make sure that it's kind of the most you get the most bang for your buck essentially when you're drawing stuff on your CPU.
Right.
Yeah.
Or
So
on your GPU.
Well, the reason why I ask,
depending on,
so especially with games like Ark, you'll have, especially in the PvP world of Ark, where you have multiple servers interacting with servers, hundreds of them that anyone can leave and join at any given moment and retain their character and whatever it is that they're transferring between places, which is a really cool idea. At the same time, like you said, you have these mega structures where when you come into render distance, render range of these structures, sometimes the rendering takes minutes. And
You get hitched, yeah.
And it major hitches, and you'll have people that and according to how the dynamics of their netcode works, if you de-render it on purpose and are using something that moves fast enough, you can actually get through the walls inside their base before it renders the base. So, which is a huge PvP like cheeky tactic that people will do if they can find a blind spot for like turrets and stuff. They'll literally just take something that flies and fly it through the walls before the server renders it and realizes the character position, and then you're inside. And then you're inside. So it's really weird, right? And to an extent, you see the same kind of stuff with Conan Exiles, where like it's loading thousands and thousands and thousands of different items on your screen at once, and there are people that are just chonking these servers down to almost unplayable levels of lag, where people are building walls from one end of the server to the other end of the map across the entire map just because they can, and in this case, like what you're saying with fortifying structures and that kind of stuff, I get that. It was just more of a question of how you were going to try and make sure that the netcode for the game for these PvE and PvP experiences, PvE and PvP, experiences, were going to be something that felt a little bit more fluid and responsive, because another one of these major issues that we have with games like this is on the player side is you'll have these delays between when a gunshot goes off and when things are actually being registered, either to or from you. So that kind of was like the larger question was, how do you feel about where the netcode is going with this, and as it pertains to bases and server taxing and that kind of stuff.
Pretty much everything in Dead Matter right now is predicted, which means that your client will actually simulate the action that the server will then later simulate ahead of the server simulating it, because the clients are always ahead of time.
Right.
Authoritative server model. So
it's client side, server authoritative is kind of the idea.
Well, you essentially do it on the client as soon as the input is fired. Traditionally, you'd fire the input and then you would wait for a packet to come back from the server, and then it would play the door opening effect if you're using a door opening, for example. So it makes things a lot more responsive when you hit a switch and immediately your client simulates what would happen if that switch gets hit, and then the server brings.
And then the server says, "Okay."
Yeah. Another thing that we're working on implementing is something called replication graph. It's what Fortnite uses, and Fortnite actually has a lot of data that has to get replicated. I think they have about 50,000 replicated actors in every single game of Fortnite, sorry.
Which is a ton.
And,
fork knife.
Yeah. And so our netcode actually takes a lot of our interactables and it packs them, it packs their states into a series of integers, and then we just change those numbers. And so instead of basically saying if a door is open or not as true or false on that specific door, and instead of on a switch, on that specific switch, instead of saying yes it's on or off, or maybe it got shot or whatever, and then there's a additional state for that. So there's a significantly so I don't know what other games do when it comes to optimizing these sort of things, because we do have to run a preprocessor. So our static map actually helps us quite a bit with because we can kind of predetermine where the data needs to go ahead of time.
Sure.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Because like when there's conflicts and stuff, obviously you need to focus on all of those moving pieces versus stuff that no one's near.
It's actually because I'm exploiting the fact that the client knows what to kind of expect, because the client, when the client loads their map, they have all of the same objects as the server.
Sure.
And yeah.
Okay. And then so does that feed in then to like some kind of lag compensation system? Have you guys considered those kinds of mechanics and how they would work?
No, what this does is it essentially takes a bunch of replicated actors that have extremely simple states, and it packs their data and then sends it down as one. So a lot of the little interactables in dead matter don't end up weighing down how many packets we need to send from the server to the client. And having less replicated actors on the server means that the server CPU is considering less actors per player on the server.
So it doesn't have to
because-
work as hard, is the idea.
This sounds like a
Yes.
pizza man with multiple pizzas leaving at once rather than a bunch of different pizza men leaving at different times.
Right. So you're kind of like packing stuff up into a larger box and sending the larger box off all at once.
Yeah, they get like replicated with one.
No, actually, the size of one true or false state is 8 bits, and
Okay.
a number between 0 and 255 is also 8 bits. 8 bits is the smallest value you can have,
Right.
but true or false is a binary state, and it can be represented as 1 or 0. So
Mhm.
before sending it over the network, we convert it into a single 1 or 0 instead of a series of 8 ones or zeros.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. So it's less data moving, less taxing on the server CPU,
Yeah.
and should reduce like the chunking, I guess would be a good way to put it.
I think a lot of the chunking also might come from really fast moving actors as well. That is a problem in a lot of networked games,
Yep.
especially because the game engine's trying to keep a bunch of lists kind of balanced as to what you need to see versus what you don't need to see. And this is like a huge anti-cheating measure. And
Yep.
it sucks because it almost backfires and creates a cheating measure for creative players. But we're hoping that with vehicles that we'll have enough time in the closed alpha that any sort of issues like that, since those are kind of the fastest ways for players to move around dead matter, we want to make sure that we don't get caught off guard with anything. And
do you have any
that's
idea
what the closed alpha is for.
Do you have any idea what kind of tick rate you would expect your servers to be running at the point in time that you do your closed alpha?
I would expect probably 20 tick.
Okay.
20 hertz. I mean, it's a server and it's a fairly open world game, so I would actually be fairly happy with 20 hertz, and I think it's a fairly achievable goal, especially with only 36 players.
Yeah, I think that would be that shouldn't be so bad. Will there be is the target, let's say, around time that you do the release of the game, to have your tick rates remain at 20 hertz, or do you anticipate that increasing over time? Or I mean, is 20 hertz at quote unquote game launch you kind of like an ideal place for the way that you've built the game that you have?
Unfortunately, it's an open world zombie survival game. We simulate our zombies on the server. So when we do certain operations like updating overlaps, or I'm not sure if it's that. I think it's the movement, or Gunschlinger would know more specifically because he's the one that told me about it. But
It's the overlaps.
yeah, good. So kind of we want to make sure that we can kind of get the highest tick rate, but we don't want to cut back on the amount of zombies, and even trimming the size of the world has been brought up just to maintain the integrity of the gameplay, because at
Sure.
the end of the day, that's what we really care about, is making Dead Matter a fun and enjoyable game.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's absolutely the most important thing. I completely agree. So I'm just gonna spend between now and full launch to I'm just gonna lobby you guys to let me have my dog on a couch.
I can put your dog in a picture on a couch.
That'd be perfect,
It's
actually.
compromise.
That'd be perfect, actually.
We have
do
like
I
we
just
have
want can I
chickens.
hang it inside my house?
I think that's one of the things we want to do, is allow people to pick up their own picture frame of their animal,
Of their
and
own
then put
animal?
it in. Yeah, and then put it, because we have the pet.
Because I am a supporter at the picture frame animal tier. So
Oh, are you?
I am.
Okay. Well,
I didn't
your,
go for the big boy gun, but
Nah, I
Why
mean, your
not?
dog will be in the game.
Why
on the
not?
couch.
I mean, even though it's worth it,
Joking.
it's outside of my budgetary constraints.
Yeah, that was just a joke.
So, well, that actually is my last. I guess I did have this one last question. So, the crowdfunded gun, being what it is, was like such a super cool like idea. Like the boomstick idea was really cool. I know that Clean is doing VSS, and Markstrom is doing an EBR. Both of which supported your development of the game at that tier. And I also saw there's only one left. Is there any thought into expanding that and allowing for more, or is this process just a little bit too time consuming in order to be able to create it? And then finally, I kind of wanted to get an idea of like whose idea was this, because I've never seen something like this done before, where like you get a functional item that like everybody knows it's you. You know what I mean?
It was kind of, I don't know. I think I think we were in a meeting one day. I think we were in a meeting one day and we said there should be a perk where someone can back and get a gun in the game. And I think we added it and then no one bought it for like months on end. And then we hired Stefan and got him to make new weapons. And
yeah, he kind of showed the because the gun animations are cool, man. They look good now. They look good.
Was this in the Kickstarter phase where the boomstick was
like Boomstick wasn't on Kickstarter?
It wasn't, or it was?
Nope, it was only on Indiegogo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, super cool idea, man. Super cool.
I don't remember the inception of it at all, but yeah, it's definitely a cool thing. I don't know if are we planning on extending it? Like, there's the money that basically comes from the backing. It pretty much just goes for like modeling the gun. So
sure.
it's not really something that's what's the word? It's like it doesn't give us a lot of money from it. It's more or less just a cool thing to get in the game, to get cool exotic guns. But we already have 20. 20 is a lot. Like 20 is more guns than some games even have. So it's like we have 20 unique backer guns, and some of these.
Oh, so guns you have 20 backed guns, not including any of the other firearms that you were including.
Yeah, well, we have 19 because we have the one hasn't been.
Well, you have the one left, right?
But then we already have a bunch of other guns, which are just like, just a common civilian gun, or maybe a gun that developers wanted, or something that's just, just needs to be in the game. So there's a 20 guns of the boomstick packs on top of the already large list of guns that we have or want to get in the game. So getting more guns, it's like maybe depending on if there's like a demand for them, but it's already a lot of guns, and the amount of money that we get from it basically just pays to get a gun in game.
Okay.
And so it's I don't know. We're running out of guns as well, which is also an issue of like people are always like, oh, can I get an AR-15? Can I get an M4? Can I get an M16? And they want the same guns. So,
like you already have them.
Yeah.
So is there plans to do like are there plans to do like attachments, modifications?
Oh yeah.
How in depth do you feel like that's going to go? Because I know that there's usually like a slot for an optic, and then maybe you can put a suppressor on it, and you can put a foregrip on it, and maybe modify the stock every once in a great while. But are there plans to go like further into that, where you could modify them even more so? Like if you wanted a skeletonized M4, can you find a handguard and like build it out?
I mean, like technically, I don't know exactly all the pieces that can get swapped out. It's like it's the stock, it's the handguard. I think the barrel is probably part of the handguard. I'm not quite sure. But then there's like rails, there's the optics. Whether you have a handguard or like a handguard, like
you mean in your game, like the barrel and the handguard are kind of connected? Is that what you mean?
No. There's some weapons where it's independent, and there's other weapons.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, depending on the weapon system. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So it goes into that depth. But then we've discussed like being able to maybe like do a conversion kit for gun, right? So like you have a 5.56, maybe you want to convert it to like 9mm, so you can have a more common or less expensive round to use with your gun.
Sure.
So there's maybe like in the future we'll have that. I don't think we're gonna ever go into like, I've played Tarkov like twice, so I don't really actually know how in depth that goes.
But there aren't any games that go that far. I mean,
I don't think
Tarkov is an anomaly.
Tarkov modding is not good. I really don't like it. it's way too crazy. I don't know.
Man,
There's a lot of-
like we were
also
talking
not
about with
good.
choice paralysis, man. There's just too much.
Yeah, well,
right.
I've also heard from several people that the way Tarkov does their weapon modifications is like I kind of understand how they do it, but going back to the talk of like draw calls, it's like their guns are
Yes.
super expensive.
Yes.
Like it's like every bullet gets rendered.
Every bullet is
draw call.
rendered. Every bullet's rendered.
Yeah.
There's real time ballistics, and all of the components of the gun are accounted for when you bring in the gun. So if you have a gun that has 20 independent component variations, all 20 of those are things that are 1-to-1 rendered, whether you're in first or third person. You can see exactly what that gun looks like from the outside as if you were holding it yourself. So
yeah,
that
goes
is
into
incredibly
like,
taxing. Yeah, incredibly taxing.
We've
looks real
I've
pretty.
got Johnny,
Looks pretty, but it's incredibly taxing.
I've got Johnny playing. Actually, we all play Stalker Anomaly now. Actually, I guess now that Johnny's and he's looking at like the modification system, and like the modification system in Anomaly it's very cool, but it's very annoying because there's a lot of little pieces.
Mhm.
And I think maybe down the road we can consider like doing something similar to that to like repair a gun, but with much less parts. So it's like maybe you have, I don't even know my gun parts that well, but just say there's like 3 main parts to a gun, and you have to like you can find them and swap them out to repair a gun for that.
Yeah, just
specific part.
some minor basic like modifications.
Yeah, it's like
or repair
anomaly
systems.
light when it comes to something like that.
Yeah, so
that's something I
if an
personally would like.
upper or if a set of lowers is wearing out, you can like exchange out like a set of lowers for an M4 and AR-15 or something, and then it kind of like rejuvenates the action. So I get that.
I like that idea a lot, and like I'd like to push for it at one point because it also helps you. You don't have to go to like a mechanic or a trader to get your gun repaired because we do have conditions for your gun.
Sure.
You can do it yourself, but then it might come at the cost of having to like Frankenstein your gun from other guns or something like that. And I do really like that idea, so it'd be cool to have.
Very cool. Well, guys, that's all I have. I don't know if you guys have anything that you want to say in closing. So hopefully it was enjoyable.
Yeah. Come join our Discord. Follow us on Twitter. Follow us on Reddit. Maybe YouTube if you want.
Yeah, I'll if you guys wanna send me all the links, I'll make sure that I put them right at the very top of the description in the video.
We have a very nice community in Discord. It's actually surprisingly like tame. Like it's
non-toxic.
Like I'm really
what?
No, yeah, I'm really glad with our community, with like the people in it and our moderators being.
Well, that's just because your game hasn't been released yet. Just give it time.
Well, that's true. That's true. But we do have a lot of
It'll be salty in a week after launch.
That's right. It's gonna go pure salt. All the streamers are gonna hate it. You'll get plenty of flack then.
We'll just make a new.
Yeah, I'm not gonna hate it. No.
We'll just make a new Discord channel, or server for that.
I'm super hard pressed to actually like really hate on a game. Like for me to say something negative, like people really gotta like be actively ignoring an issue. I don't normally.
We have we say negative things about games sometimes, but like it's very superficial. Like it's never anything against devs or really the game itself. It's just we don't enjoy something. Everybody will complain about something when it's happening, but like for me to really, really hate a game, like it has to do something bad.
Yeah. Well, guys, thank you again very, very much. Please go check out the Indiegogo page, everybody, and check these guys out. Give them your hard-earned cash and sign up for the alpha and stuff and come play their game.
Support,
because these guys are cool and it seems like they actually genuinely care about their stuff. So
yes,
yeah, go do that. Give them dollars.